Welcome to Inside New York's Art World. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein, and my guest tonight is an artist who might be said to have made heroes of everyday objects. An artist who, until recently, addressed himself to expressions about human life, never using the human image. I'm very pleased to welcome Jim Dine. Jim Dine emerged on the scene along about 1959 as a creator of happenings and of painting assemblages. I believe it was in that year that together with Oldenburg, you shared a first one-man show at the Judson Gallery. What did you exhibit then?
I exhibited expressionist objects based on expressionism, large heads, suits of clothes that were really my suits, as though there were humans in them but weren't. A kind of, well, let me say that at that time I was very influenced by primitive art. I don't mean art of the primitive cultures, but I mean art of the insane, art of, Dubuffet calls it art brut. Children's art. I was teaching little children at the time, and it wasn't just me. Oldenburg was interested in it too. We'd pick up stuff on the street that children had dropped. We found that sort of thing inspiring. All of this we found inspiring because we were trying to walk around abstract expressionism, this thing made by our fathers, and because there is that pressure in America to constantly be making something new. And therefore, youth responds to that by neglecting the lessons one is taught and hoping that you will make some discovery by this other method rather than going the natural way through your history, through one's history. Oldenburg and I both showed things that had to do with the iconography of the street and graffiti, and we were particularly in love with the Lower East Side and with dirt, not absurdly so, in the sense that we really felt a great romance with the way soot lay on snow, or the way one would see bums dead in the snowstorm in the Bowery. And we were fortunate to be able to exhibit at this church, at the Judson Church, which was a swell place.
And you express this with these anti-art objects and...
Well, we didn't think they were anti-art. Everybody else did, but I mean, I knew I was an artist, so therefore there was nothing to be anti about.
For those who may not remember or know, what were happenings?
We made plays. It was like an artist theater. It really had nothing to do with the popularization of so-called happenings. It's Capro's word, Alan Capro's word, which had to do with something quite different than what I was doing, or Oldenburg, or Red Grooms. We were doing a kind of, once again, an expressionist theater, without words, mainly. But they were close to psychodrama, you see, the art of the insane at times. They were influenced by early films. Grooms was certainly influenced by things like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and I was influenced by my bad dreams.
You were also influenced, you've said, by Alan Capro, who is...
No, I wasn't influenced by him particularly. I was under his command in this rebel army. And he was an older man, and he was the most famous artist we all knew.
How old were you at the time?
I was 22, 23. But he was famous, I mean, in downtown famous at the time. And he had been studying with John Cage, and much of his work was based on John Cage and the laws of chance, all of which I didn't understand, and it didn't interest me anyway. But what interested me was that there was this group of people that one could relate to, and it was exciting.
Whatever happened to happenings?
I don't know. They just, you mean why did we stop making what we were making? Because, well, I stopped making them because I was put here to be a painter, and I could not take my time anymore from it. And it was just more than I could deal with, you know, doing that. And the demand for that was very great amongst those people who, at the time, I mean, it's hard to talk about it now because it doesn't exist, but at the time there was a small public that fed off this so-called avant-garde, this downtown scene. And it was quite a romantic scene, I guess, for many people. And those people kept pushing, said, why don't you do it? You've sold out. You made such a great thing. Why don't we make these happenings? The car crash was so great, you know. I just wanted to paint. It wasn't any of their business, you know. But one got that in New York then, and I don't know what you get in New York now.
Do those happenings, do you think, relate in any way to today's performance art?
I don't think it could exist without it. And I think they were far more interesting.
The happenings?
The happenings were, just because they from my point of view, they had beginnings and ends. And they were somewhat of a literary event. And I don't consider the performance art a literary event. And it doesn't, I can't stand the idea that performance art is called this. I mean, it should be a theater form or something. I mean, it's not about painting, and that's really what I consider myself, and that's what I consider, I'm rather strict about that, I consider myself an artist and a painter, a draftsman. Therefore, I don't feel any relation to those people that show those things, you know, as Lorenzo de Medici in a gallery somewhere, nude. That's their business, but they wouldn't confuse it, and I wish they wouldn't show it in galleries. It's rather narrow of me, but that's the way I feel, you know.
Let's talk about another beginning. Jim Dine doesn't own a bathrobe. He says he doesn't ever wear one. Yet for 15 years, you've been obsessively painting uninhabited, larger-than-life, invisible man wraps. Can you give us some clues to these mysterious emblems and what they mean for you?
Well, I mean, they're only mysterious. I mean, I hope they're mysterious after I've painted them. It's not a mysterious idea. I was under the pressure of, as I said, as a young person in New York, under the pressure of this, first place being reacting against abstract expressionism, but also living in a climate of abstraction, and much less strong than I am now, willed. And I wanted to make a self-portrait badly, since that seemed to be the thing I was most interested in, that is, i.e., my interior self as a landscape or as a subject matter for everything. And I did see once in the New York Times this bathrobe that looked like I was in it. And I just thought I would start that way. And in the beginning, I hung things on it. I mean, I used it it was a support for objects that I was charging with these metaphors. But recently, when I've drawn it or painted it, and I've come back to it recently in the last 2 years, it's more anonymous, and I don't consider it a self-portrait. I think it's a rather prime object, and therefore I keep using it and won't discard it now. It would be silly to.
I wonder if you could make some comparison to your use of the robe with de Kooning's use of the woman.
Well, I think he was much more direct than I was about figurative art, and certainly much surer. And of course, he comes from a much more enviably well-trained position than I do. I mean, that is, he comes from an academy, trained as a draftsman, sure as hell that the best thing to draw in the world is the human figure, never questioning it, able as a mature human being to abstract from it, so-called, and from landscape. And so therefore I don't think there is a comparison. I think mine is quirky and eccentric compared to his.
You said that your early work was reminiscent of expressionism,
Right.
with objects hanging
Right.
from them. Those objects that have now become, I guess, part of the familiar dinery,
Yes.
so to speak, often have tools as psychological, sexual presences, heroes, sometimes tragic, sometimes objects of affection. What is the genesis of the tools, and what is their significance?
I've said it before. I mean, it really is true. I grew up with them all my life in my family's hardware stores. I found them exciting and as objects, and it seemed a natural thing to do, as natural as using oil paint. To use a hammer to me was as real as I say, picking up a brush and putting on a piece of red paint. The red paint was no different to me than the hammer. The hammer, of course, had a lot of connotations. I didn't choose to paint it very much. I liked that real thing there, but I haven't used an object on anything in about 3 years, and I certainly don't miss it. It was a support mechanism when it wasn't necessary, I don't believe. I was selling myself short. As I said before, and I can't say it enough about myself, I'm just now beginning to understand what it is to be a painter, a draftsman, and I'm not interested in shortcutting it by using the real thing. I don't think that's a particularly brave move, and nor is it a radical one. At the time, it was the only way I could speak, that's all. You know.
Have you turned your back on all that hardware now?
I don't turn my back on it. I don't refute it. Just, as I say, I've gone beyond that. Hope.
The iconography of your work seems quite obviously autobiographical. In fact, sometimes the spectator almost feels like a snoop. If you are the bathrobe, for example, who is that ubiquitous heart?
Oh, nobody. It's just a heart. It's just, that's another thing, too, I found was kind of universal sign. And it is, obviously, it's not just a heart. And it was a way, once again, to make a painting. I always seemed to find ways to make a painting. Skirting this issue of figurative art, you see, that's what it stood for. I mean, it's nobody in particular. It's not my Valentine. But then, of course, everyone likes a Valentine, and that's what I mean. It is a very universal, nice form.
You also had a lot of early experience with paint. Did that influence your palette later on?
You mean working in the store with the paint? Nah.
I was just thinking of your descriptions of how you mixed the paint.
Mixing the paint, yeah. Well, that was just an exciting machine. It didn't, nothing influences the way I use color because I don't understand that. I just go on my nerve with that. I do what has to be done for the moment. I'm so naive about painting and so puerile in what I know that I'm just trying to feel my way about it. I don't know enough about painting. I've given most of my time to drawing because it's one thing I find it easier to do and more enjoyable, but also because it's a simpler process. And I've tried to learn how to do that first. And I'm painting now, but it's awfully painful, and it's I'm not very sure of myself, not necessarily in the outcome, but as it goes along, as I make a painting, it's a very unpleasant experience, unlike it used to be a joyful one, which was a kind of cathartic way to get a lot out, you know, and get a lot of material going. Now it's a very painful experience for me and tedious until I get to the final part where I can pull it together. Most of it's just technique. And
we know that your private allegiance to poetry and to literature repeatedly surfaces in your public art, especially in your choice of subject matter and the number of collaborative projects that you've had with writers and poets. Can you describe any of those efforts?
The collaborations? I've just recently collaborated with Robert Creeley, the poet, on a book called Mabel. I do it because it gets lonesome being an artist in a studio. So it's nice to share with other people, and people you respect, and get some feedback from. So it's a social act as much as anything. And it gives me sometimes you're out of ideas. It gives you something to do. Plus that it makes me read harder the people I collaborate with, and then I learn more.
I've read somewhere a quote by you where you said that literature has meant more to me than anything except for music. The fact is that both music and literature really mean more to me than painting. Is that quote accurate, and is it true?
It's a little simplified. Obviously, painting is the most inspiring thing for me. It's the reason I am here. But as for a day-to-day muse, I find music and literature more sustaining, mainly because I can't get off too much on reproductions, and I'm not always running to museums. Although it's a nice thing to do, it's a nice hobby to have. I have been very inspired, particularly by music lately.
To the works of what contemporary painters do you most respond?
Well, I have a good friend, R.B. Kittai, the Anglo-American painter who lives in London. And I don't necessarily respond to everything he does. I respond to him because he's my friend, and for what he has to say, because he's got a lot to say, a lot of cranky, terrific stuff to say that helps me clarify my thinking. And I like his work quite well. And I respond to the painter Baltus. I never saw a bad one. And I know it's like peculiar, a little kinky art, but that isn't what interests me. It's that single-mindedness, commitment to the figure, and the way he manipulates it. I'm very moved by it. I like the French painter Jean Elion, the figurative things, because I think he's been a brave man to make sometimes such ugly paintings, sticking to this thing. I'm always devoted and owe so much to de Kooning as a draftsman. I think he needn't to be so obscure sometimes. I can't stand, like the sculpture, I kept trying to see what it was. It was just too obscure. Like Francis Bacon, who I also think is a grand artist on the grand scale, but lousy finally, because both those guys have a way with manipulating the paint and everything, but everybody, he doesn't have to look like Quasimodo. It's just to be modern, It's a kind of failure of modernism that happened. And there are other, peculiar artists who I like. In England, I particularly like a painter called Lucien Freud. And in America, I look at a lot of American paintings. I love Edward Hopper and Akins, but I cannot relate to them totally. Their art is a Yankee wasp art, and I'm none of those things, and I can't relate to them particularly. I wouldn't know what to take from them. Morandi, I love Morandi.
Several times, various guests have talked about the importance of New York to the career of an artist. In fact, we've gone so far as to discuss, is New York still necessary? From your remote perch in Vermont, How important is it for you to have a link with New York?
Well, not at all, except commercially. My links were by mail and through my memories with a stockpile of images, mainly from Europe and from the past of my life. So New York, when I came here in 1958 or 9, it was important. It was the only place to come, and I still think it is. Just because, for a young person, it is where things could happen to you. And it is electric, and it exists not like Paris or London because it's beautiful, because they're beautiful. It exists in this idea of people making things and making things, creative things. And I think it's tremendously important. I have two teenage sons who really need it for their artistic endeavors, because it's where it is the most exciting place to be. But it certainly isn't that important to me. I'm here now because I've missed going to the ballet and concerts and things, and I just don't want to miss that anymore for a while. And I've had it up to here with snow, so, you know.
Given your early avant-garde reputation and listening to some of the things that you've said this evening and observing your work of the recent past, your latest drawings of nudes and figures seem a dramatic, even unexpected change. Are you moving more towards a human presence, and are these surrogates for the human presence interesting you less and less?
Mm-hmm. I'm not able to paint them yet. I'm not good enough. I'm painting still lifes because they hold still, and I don't have to talk to them, and I can spend more time concerning myself with making the picture. But I do draw from the figure all the time, and I'm getting ready to do it because it seems to me just a much more interesting way to spend one's time than pushing paint around, that high-class decoration.
Well, how did this change evolve, this change to representational pictures?
It evolved through my prints because, sorry, get some water. It evolved through my prints because in prints, I seem to have the nerve to start making pictures of humans because there was something once removed. I mean, that is, the printer was in between me. And I didn't have to account for it so much. And there was a lot expected of me. And I'm someone who is not unaware of the pressures around me. And I felt I had a certain image to live up to, and this is what was expected, et cetera, et cetera. But in printmaking, for some reason, I was able to be freer. And in 1970, I made about 9 dry points of myself. And it went from there. It went from there, but it also went because I was spending a lot of time printing in Europe, particularly in England, and spending time with Kittai at his house. And we had a lot of talks about it. And he said some very, very seductive things about it, and things that made sense to me. He said things like, there is a hierarchy of subject matter, that a painting of a face is more interesting than a painting of an apple, is more interesting. An abstract sculptor I know, Bill Tucker in England, said to me, he said, Rothko said to him, he said he'd much rather see a painting of a bullfight any day than a painting of apples. It is just true that I'm not talking about so-called heroic issues of world art or American art or what we've fought for and gotten to and this avant-garde. I'm talking about the need of somebody who is an artist, who has to speak through his hands and eyes to represent the human visage, because it is the most interesting thing you can do. I can't get enough of it. And I mean, I find that painting still lifes too, but as I say, I'm training. I'm just training now.
Do you consider yourself now to be part of any movement?
No, no.
Did you ever consider yourself a pop artist?
No, no. They all did, I know. It was a very confusing situation. But I never did think I was a pop artist. I mean, I knew who was, but I certainly wasn't. It's just that it was easier for magazines and people to lump everyone into that. No one looked hard anyway, and that's what I mean. No one looks at anything.
How did you decide to use the written word in your work? I'm thinking of a particular very enormous painting that I guess recounts the name of every person or memory of Cincinnati, your original home. How did that happen?
Well, I used the written word for two different reasons. I'll get to that. I used it because I had no confidence that people would understand what they were looking at, that I had painted. So I would paint a hammer and write hammer underneath it. And it seemed terribly brave, and people got very excited by it. But in fact, it was just like another object, this word. Came out of a tradition of people doing that, after all. I mean, Cubist paintings are based on a lot of that. But the painting called the name painting, I did because it was the first indication I had that I was running out of these avant-garde ideas. So I had to get, I was sitting in London and I hadn't made a painting in a while, so I thought, this is a terrific idea. I mean, it just would be something no one had ever done, so I just wrote out the names of everybody I ever knew in my life. And I think I remembered everyone. I left a few people out because I hated them. And otherwise, and it looked very nice. It looks like a little landscape, you know. Kind of, but it's quite okay, but it's an eccentric work.
You've said, in many ways, I feel as though I'm just beginning, that my life is just beginning.
Right.
Are these the best years of your life?
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. Yeah.
A special thanks to you, Jim Dine, for coming and being so generous, so thoughtful, and so modest. Thank you very much for being with us.